Hey all, Brian here. So I'm going to read the sixth chapter of Warrior Priest of Dmon-li, the third book in the Morcyth Saga. Little backstory. James, Jerome, and Miko, after ending up in a swamp, they're trying to head north back home. They come across an ancient ruin. They inadvertently trigger a trap. They're stuck inside of it. They find the hidden entrance to the subterranean section of this ruin. And in the last book, and at the end of last book, they found the secret door leading to the next level, and that's where we're at right now. Big nasty stench coming up from below. The stench only increased as they descended, making their eyes water and bringing them almost to the point of gagging. The bottom of the stairs came out in a large cavernous room. From the looks of it, the ones who built this place left the cavern just the way they found it, with only minimal alterations. The prickling increased to an almost painful degree as James reached the last step. He paused a moment before entering the cavern, gasping from the effect the area had on him. 5 feet from the end of the steps, a dark pool began, the same as had been depicted in the mural upstairs. The light from the orb didn't illuminate enough for them to see to the far edge of the dark water. "This looks just like the pool you pushed in the mural to open the secret door," Michael said when he entered. James nodded and replied, "That's what gave me the idea. When I saw the mural, I figured we would eventually find this." "What is it?" Jerome asked as he approached for a closer look. "Don't get too close," James warned. Stopping a few feet from the pool, he wrinkled his nose as he turned back. "It's the source of the stench." James nodded as he gazed across the cavern. Increasing the luminosity of his orb, he was able to see to the other side of the cavern where the pool ended. Mirror black, it sat in the center of the cavern without even a ripple. The light from the orb wasn't reflecting off its surface, more like it was being absorbed. Plunk! A ripple formed in the middle of the pool from where a stone had broken its surface. James quickly turned and grabbed Michael's arm as he was about to throw another. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. Looking guilty, Michael dropped the rock and said, "Sorry." Okay, that makes me think of the mines of Moria, when they're outside and Gandalf's trying to open the door, and was it Merry Pippin threw a rock in the water and Aragorn got on them. Of course, that may have been the inspiration for that particular scene. "James, look!" Jerome exclaimed as he pointed to the ceiling of the cavern directly over the pool, directly above the pool. Yeah, above sounds better. A crystal, enormous in size, hung suspended several feet from the ceiling. It pulsed a dim white light, almost like a beating heart. "What is it?" Michael asked. "That," James explained, "is the source of the magic maintaining the barrier." "Are you sure?" "Not entirely, as I didn't create it," James replied in exasperation, "but I can't imagine it being anything else." "Now what?" Turning to him, he said, "Michael, stop asking me questions. I can't think of what to do when you keep interrupting." "Sorry," he apologized. Again, Mines of Moria. Gandalf's there trying to open the door, figure it out, and the hobbits keep asking him questions, driving him crazy. He moved slowly around the dark pool as he tried to consider his next course of action. There was nothing but the pool and the crystal. Coming back to where the others waited, he asked, "Jerome, do you think you could hit the crystal with a stone?" "Maybe," he replied as he bent over and picked up a fair-sized rock. "Isn't this going to be dangerous?" "I hope not," he replied. "I just want to see what will happen." Jerome took aim and then threw the rock with all his might. They watched the rock soar upward and then abruptly altered course before coming close. "Thought so," James said when he saw it being deflected. "Then what had me do it? Now I know for sure." He stood there, staring thoughtfully up at the crystal. Then from the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a ripple out near the center of the pool. Turning to Miko, he glared and said, "Stop throwing rocks in the water." "I didn't," denied Miko. Looking to Jerome, he saw him shaking his head. "Then what?" They turned and looked out to the pool. 4 separate rippling formations now moved across the water. "James," said Miko with fear in his voice, "what's going on?" Staring out at the ripples, he replied, "I don't know." He gestured for everyone to edge back toward the stairs as the ripples moved in their direction. They paused a moment at the base of the stairs as the ripples approached the edge of the pool. When the ripples were a mere 3 feet from the shoreline, something began emerging from beneath the surface. In growing horror, James watched as the headless torso made its way out and shambled toward them. As you remember, or you may recall, in the last chapter at the mural, well, at some point he saw pictures of people being decapitated and throwing in the water. Well, this is the water. Upon reaching the top, he paused as he looked back down and saw the torso, along with others, reach the base. Without pause, the lead torso stepped onto the bottom and shambled its way after them. Up to the surface, he yelled as they turned and broke into a mad dash for the next set of stairs. They raced up to the next level and then ran down the corridor to the winding stairs which led to the courtyard above. Jerome was the first to reach the stairs and took them two at a time. Michael followed closely behind. James reached the stairs and began to follow them up when Jerome suddenly stopped suddenly and crouched down near the top. As Michael neared him, he grabbed him and pulled him down as well. "What's wrong?" James asked. Jerome motioned for him to move up and join him at the top of the stairs. He moved past the shaken Michael and settled down next to Jerome. Outside was dark. Night had fallen while they had been down below. "Over there," Jerome said as he pointed off to the right. Looking in the indicated direction, James saw a ghostly apparition moving among the ruins, and then he saw another. Scanning the entire courtyard, he saw over a dozen moving about, both men and women. "What do we do now?" he asked. Suddenly from behind them, Michael screamed, "James!" as he shoved his way up between them. Looking to the bottom of the stairs, James saw one of the headless torsos from the pool. It stepped upon the bottom step as it reached for Miko. James let loose with a blast of power which knocked it back but failed to stop it. Blasting it again, he motioned for the others to follow him back down. If there are only the initial four we saw coming out of the pool, we'll have a better chance with them than out there with the spirits. Jerome stood as his knives appeared in his hands. He moved down to meet the headless torso where it was returning to the bottom of the stairs. Fear and revulsion warred within him as he lashed out at it. His knife struck, cleaving a long, deep wound across his chest. To his horror, he watched as the wound rapidly closed itself back up. "They're healing themselves!" He shouted back to James as he pressed on with the attack. Three more of the torsos came shuffling toward them down the hallway. "Get back here!" James hollered. Jerome backpedaled toward the stairs just as James let loose with another bolt of energy which practically sizzled as it passed through the air. When it struck the torso, it blasted apart. Pieces flew back down the corridor, covering a good 6 feet with torso chunks. "Yeah!" hollered Michael. The other three continued to lurch their way toward them. James was about ready to let loose with another of the bolts when he noticed the pieces of the blasted torso began to work their way toward each other. It was almost like iron being drawn toward a magnet. When two pieces touched, they fused back together to make one larger piece. "There's no way to stop them," he cried, letting loose with a second blast that took out another one. But as with the first, the pieces worked themselves back together. From behind James, Michael screamed as he saw a ghostly apparition at the top of the stairs staring down at him. James turned and saw the man there, his mouth moving as if trying to say something. The apparition reached out toward Miko. Michael screamed again and lost his balance. He fell and rolled down the stairs, knocking both Jerome and James off their feet. As James fell, he twisted and landed on his back with a thud. The medallion bearing the star of Morcyth slipped out of his shirt. Suddenly, a bright light erupted from the medallion. The shattered pieces of the torsos began to smoke and then dissolved into nothingness. Realizing the effect the light from the medallion had, he grabbed it and held it up high as the light from the star filled the corridor with a blinding light. The torsos moving toward them down the corridor smoked when the star's light touched them. Continuing to shamble forward, the torsos smoked with ever greater intensity. The corridor filled with a nauseating miasma as they dissolved. When the last piece of the last torso dissolved into nothingness, the light went out. "What did you do?" Jerome asked. "I didn't do anything," James replied, staring in wonder at the star. "It happened all on its own." Michael looked up to the top of the stairs, but the ghostly apparition was gone. "Follow me," James said as he got up and turned to head back into the underground complex. As he started to move, Michael asked hysterically, "What are you doing?" "If this worked on the torsos," he explained, "maybe it'll work on the pool." "Will that get rid of the barrier?" Jerome asked. Shrugging, James said, "I don't know. Let's worry about one thing at a time." As they proceeded through the levels back down to the pool, they came across several other torsos shambling their way along the corridors. Each time, James held up the star, and each time it blazed forth with life, returning the torsos to nothingness. Growing in confidence, James hurried toward the cavern. Upon leaving the stairs and entering the cavern with the pool, he again held the star up high. Blazing forth with the most intense light it had yet produced, it infused the entire cavern with its blinding brilliance. Where the light touched the pool, the water writhed backward as if trying to get away. James walked slowly closer to the edge of the dark, holding the star in front of him. The water roiled and bubbled. Steam came off it, filling the cavern with its horrid odor. The stench, as bad as it was before, was nothing compared to what was now coming off the pool. Rot, death, decay seemed to fill the cavern as the steam continued erupting from the pool. The light from the star kept the steam at bay, dissolving it as it did the torsos. Jerome and Michael stood shoulder to shoulder with James as the lake continued to hiss and boil wherever the light touched it. The steam soon became so thick that it was as if they stood in the middle of a fog bank. Suddenly, a torso lurched from the fog and reached for them, but quickly dissolved into nothingness when the light from the star touched it. The star continued to work its effect upon the pool, the level slowly dropping as more of it steamed and dissolved away. When the pool was close to being empty, from overhead they heard a high-pitched noise which grew increasingly in volume. Looking up, they saw the crystal pulsating wildly, and then suddenly a shattering crack as the giant crystal overhead exploded into a million shards that rained down throughout the entire cavern. With the shattering of the crystal, the resistance from the pool stopped, and the star's light quickly destroyed the rest of it. Once every last drop had been eradicated, the light abruptly stopped, and the cavern was once again plunged into darkness. They stood there in the darkness, and James was about to make his orb when lights appeared all over the floor of the cavern. Ghostly apparitions began to take shape. Michael screamed, and James held aloft the star, but nothing happened. The spirits turned to him, gave him a slight bow, and then began to fade away. After the last spirit had faded away and the cavern was again dark, James created his orb. "What was that?" Jerome asked, referring to the spirits. "I think they were the souls of the people who had been sacrificed here long ago," he reasoned, though we may never know for sure. "Let's get out of here," Michael said, not wanting to spend another moment within this cavern. "See no reason to stay," agreed James. "I don't feel magic being worked here. I don't feel magic being worked. The barrier may be down." "Then what are we waiting for?" exclaimed Michael as he shoved past James and moved quickly up the stairs to the level above. Turning, James followed him up the stairs, and they made their way back through the complex to the winding steps leading to the surface. He paused. Hang on one second. He paused at the top and cautiously peered out into the courtyard. When no apparitions were apparent, he motioned for the others to follow. "Looks like the spirits down in the cavern were the ones who had been up here." "I hope so," Michael exclaimed. "I don't want to stay here any longer." "I agree," Jerome said, as he moved to the fore and led them toward the northern skull pyramid they'd attempted to get around earlier. They glanced over to where the large skull pyramid had stood as they made their way through the courtyard earlier. With the shattering of the crystal, the skull pyramid had collapsed and was now a jumbled pile of skulls. Hang on one second. With the shattering of the crystal, the skull pyramid had collapsed and was now only a jumbled pile of skulls. When they reached the northern pyramid, they found that it, too, had collapsed, the skulls lying in a heap. Jerome moved cautiously to where the bear had been and held out his hand. When he reached where the bear once had been, his hand continued on through. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and they quickly moved to leave the area. Hurrying on past, they traveled through the swamp for an hour before deciding they had put enough distance between them and the ruins. Tired and exhausted, they made camp. They took turns keeping watch and managed to make it through the night with no disturbances. When Jerome woke the following morning, he found James sitting by the fire, staring at the crystal acquired in the underground complex. "What are you doing?" "Thinking," he replied. "The ones who built that place had these everywhere, as well as the main crystals down below above the pool. And," he said, prompting him to continue, "there must be a reason, something about the crystals that make them important to whoever had lived here," he explained. "I intend to figure it out." "I'm sure you will," he said. "I'm going to see if I can scare up some food for breakfast." "Don't bother," James said as he motioned over to several dead animals, which had each with a slug hole. "I already got something. If you wouldn't mind preparing them." "No problem." He took his knife and skinned them, preparing them for the fire. As he worked, he continually glanced over to James where he stared at the crystal. When the animals were roasting over the fire, the smell woke Miko. "Finally up, I see," Jerome said. Michael didn't reply, just went to the edge of the camp and answered the call of nature. Upon returning, he said, "James, why did your medallion act the way it did?" James glanced to him and then returned the shard to his pouch. Turning to face him, he said, The star of Morcyth is a symbol of a god. Where I come from is often the belief that religious symbols have some effect upon the dead or half-dead. Often it's based upon the strength of the faith of the one wielding it. But I don't worship Morcyth, so I'm not exactly sure why it did what it did." "Maybe it's no ordinary medallion," Jerome said from where he sat, turning the spits over the fire. "Where did you get it?" When James hesitated to answer, he said, "I think we have a right to know after what we've been through." So, James related the events after coming to this world. Michael was astounded that James claimed to be from another world and had dealings with gods, or whatever Igor was. "He said not to lose it, that I may need it," he told him. I guess he was right. "Incredible," Jerome said. "And you still don't know why you were brought here or what you should do?" Shaking his head, he said, "No, but I'm figuring it to have something to do with the god Morcyth." That makes sense since you were given his medallion," Jerome said. "And that's why you were in the City of Light?" "Yes. I was there looking for the last high temple to Morcyth, which we discovered when we fled. But that doesn't answer any of my questions. When I talked with Olenard, he said that the last high priest had been born in Saragon. I thought maybe to go there next, but it's currently in the hands of the Empire, so I'm not really sure what I should do next." "I'm sure something will come up," Jerome assured him. "They're not going to have brought you here just to let you cool your heels." Smiling, James said, "Probably not." "Well, anyway, breakfast is ready," he announced as he handed each a skewer. As they took the offered food, James sat back and relaxed, unable to get the events of the last few days out of his mind. They sat in silence as they ate, just happy to be out of the complex and on their way again. Jerome wondered what was going on with his sister and the others they had left back at Alcur. He was anxious to meet up with them when they returned to Trindle and was sure she would make it there safely. The pit fighters had given their word to see her safely there, and if anyone could, it was them. As he ate, he also contemplated James and his strange tale. Fantastic, to say the least. The story would hardly seem plausible but for the events he'd been party to since joining with him. What happened back in the underground complex lent credence to it all. "What are we to do now?" "Well, remember that mural we saw back in the ruins?" James replied. "The one showing the countryside?" Jerome and Michael both nodded, and Jerome said, "Yeah, I remember. It looked like the main waterway that flowed near here will lead to a lake nestled up in the mountains. I figure if we go that way, we might avoid any Empire forces which may be on the lookout for us." "Maybe," he replied. "At least it's going north." James nodded. "That's what I was figuring too. Since the swarm has been free of their patrols thus far, if we stay within it, then we should be able to make it north without detection." "Then what?" "Then we see what our choices are as they present themselves," James said. "Not much else we can do." Michael set his skewer and what was left of the carcass on the ground as he gave out a large belch. James glanced at him and smiled. "Ready to go?" Patting his stomach, Michael said, "Yeah." Jerome took a few more bites of his and then tossed it off to the side as well. Standing up, he kicked dirt upon the fire until it was smothered. James looked to him and said, "Lead on." Grabbing his walking stick for support, he shuffled along after Jerome and Michael right beside him. His leg and side still hurt considerably, but he managed to keep up. They reached the waterway they were heading for. Jerome turned to follow it as he led them north, keeping the river to their left. As they moved north, the state of vegetation quickly improved until there were no signs of the withering that had been evident near the complex. Having to forge their way through the undergrowth, Not to mention maneuvering around stagnant pools of water, he did not allow them to make great time, and they soon had to stop for the night. James's leg and side hurt abysmally bad, and it was all he could do the last few hours just to stay upright. When they finally stopped to make camp, he collapsed. Jerome and Michael allowed him to rest as they went about building a fire and acquiring food for dinner. After he'd eaten his fill, he promptly fell into an exhausted sleep. Jerome and Michael took turns that night in keeping watch, allowing James to sleep the night through. When morning dawned, they woke him up once breakfast was ready. His leg and side still throbbed badly, and he was afraid they were becoming infected. But when Jerome examined them, he said they looked to be healing fine. Relieved, James took the offered food and ate ravenously. He had worried about infection, what with not having any antiseptic or anything. After eating, he still felt weak, tired, and hurting badly. But somehow he was able to bring himself to his feet, though he leaned heavily upon his walking stick. With Jerome taking the lead, they continued moving north along the waterway. Ever since the morning, James had noticed how life in the swamp had begun to return. Back when they were by the complex, there had been no birds or any other sign of life. But once they left it behind, the sounds of the swamp returned to normal. Off in the distance, they even heard the cry of the rhino lizard. James was glad that it was far off. They were not in any shape to defend themselves from an attack. When the bugs and mosquitoes became unbearable again, he coated them with another dose of the noxious bug repellent. The stench didn't bother them nearly so much now that they had been around it for so long. Much to everyone's displeasure, they were still in the swamp when night fell. They found a suitable stretch of land to make camp, and Michael built a fire while Jerome went in search of food. James felt a little better than he had earlier in the morning. He must be on the mend, for the day's walk seemed to have worked out most of the kinks rather than made them worse. After dinner, when Jerome and Michael discussed standing watch, James offered to take the first couple of hours. "Are you sure? If you need rest, then rest. If something should happen, we will need you strong, not exhausted." Yeah, James," Michael added. "Your leg needs to heal, so rest." "I appreciate your concern," he told them, "but I'm not really that tired right now. I just as soon take a turn. I feel bad when you two stand watch and all I do is sleep." Jerome looked at him a moment and then shrugged. "If you feel up to it, all right. You take the first watch." Turning to Michael, he said, "You take the midnight watch, and I'll finish it off." Michael nodded as he laid down. "Sounds good to me." He glanced over to James and said, "Be sure to wake me when it's my turn." "I will," James assured him. He made himself comfortable as his fellows settled to sleep. And there it ends. The ending of the chapter might have been best when they got past the skull pyramid. I was thinking about that as I was reading this, but it is what it is, and we'll do chapter 7 tomorrow. Glad you're all with me. If you find this entertaining and you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. That will help me a lot. Like the reading and make a comment, even if it's just hi. Just make some comment. I'll reply, and the more comments, the more it'll get shared. Y'all take care. Have a good evening.